I'm not going to waste any more time. So let's just move on straight to Sai for his account.
Namaste. I'm actually at sea. I never imagined that people belonging to this ideological spectrum could draw this kind of a crowd in Kolkata. So thank you for coming in such numbers. It's heartening. I just miss a couple of historians at this point who we had the opportunity to engage with in my previous outing here. Because the conversation was getting way too serious and they managed to make it a bit funny. So, before I proceed any further, I'd like to thank Swapanda for this brilliant organization that he's put together, for the work that he's done, and for heaping undeserved praise and encomia on me. I say this because I have benefited from the positioning of social media significantly because I happen to be a part of this generation. But imagine what his generation and the generation before that would have gone through to represent this ideology. So, if anything, people like me are standing on the shoulders of these giants with respect and humility and gratitude. And I envy the interesting life Sri Sanya leads. And the kind of things and number of things he manages to excel at, it's fantastic. I think we have a polyglot in this generation. He's a role model worthy of emulation for a lot of people of this generation and the next. How many people are from my Biradri, namely the legal fraternity here? A show of hands, please. Thank you. And how many from NUJS? Thank you. Thanks for coming. So, let me explain why I was supposed to deliver a lecture in their college today. Was supposed to, should tell you a lot. So the original session was at 12:30. The group from the institution that put together the invitation, and they'd been coordinating with me for a couple of months now. They'd done everything, but the usual suspects started circulating certain messages on WhatsApp. And then the invitation was put to vote. I received credible information from the organizers that the vote was certainly in my favor, but I said, I'm not going to make it for the simple reason that once an invitation is extended, I don't see the point of putting it to vote. So I respectfully rescinded. But this tells you how much of work is left to be done, that even in law schools, where free speech is supposed to be celebrated and practiced, not just celebrated through lip service, you see how it plays out in action. And then we hold forth and grandstand on soapboxes as conveniently as possible and as often as possible as to how free speech is under attack. So here's what I propose to do. This will be a slightly fishing and roving exercise in terms of dealing with history. I've had the benefit of learning from better informed people, so let me start off with a few disclaimers, which should warm the cockles of the hearts of quite a few people on the other end of the ideological spectrum. I am not a historian by any yardstick, by any stretch of imagination. I am just a keen student of Bharat Mata, that's it. My foray into this subject has been largely because of certain compulsions. Because law never completes the picture, it only tells you a part of the picture. I don't think it's ever possible to understand law as a subject without understanding history, without understanding economics, without understanding culture. And that's precisely why, and this is not an attempt to sell the books, this is precisely why I've tried to approach that subject through multiple prisms to try and see how did this cumulative journey translate to some kind of a policy or a legislative approach or a constitutional fiber or fabric as far as Bharat is concerned. That's the entire agenda behind the books. But the more I read history to understand our constitutional journey, I realize that it's impossible for me to talk about Bharat's constitution without talking about its consciousness. That is according to me, that's where the battle is being fought. Politics at best is a topsoil. I think it's perhaps the uppermost layer, and perhaps, and I say this without any attempt at derision or trying to sound derogatory, it is at best a superficial layer. It doesn't complete the picture. It doesn't tell you the entire thing. So if you have to understand Bharat's history, or even Bengal's history for that matter, I think you will have to split and stratify that journey into at least 4 different layers. The political layer is just one aspect of it. Never conflate the political layer with the social layer, because the social layer is the subterranean, let's say, dhara that constantly flows. The third layer, of course, is the metaphysical layer. You cannot make sense of Bharat's history without understanding its metaphysical journey, its social journey, and its political journey, because every Shivaji has needed a Samarth Ramdas. And every Hakka and Bukka has needed a Vidyaranya. So, the hand of the Rishi holds and leads the hand of the Raja, giving him or her the necessary honor codes within which they are supposed to operate. That's been the history of Bharat. That's been the history of Bharat. I'll just go back to what Sri Sanyal has beautifully educated us with for the last 1 hour, and I think it was illuminating. I specifically put a question to Swapanda asking what are the red lines that I'm not supposed to cross here. He said, you have a carte blanche, go ahead, do what you want. So, with his blessings and with hopefully the encouragement of the audience, I'd like to unpack a few uncomfortable aspects of Bharat's history, use a few terms which we think are outlawed, which I don't think have been outlawed yet, fortunately. And allow me to make you a bit uncomfortable, make you squirm in your seats, and see how much I can push you, because that's my job, agent provocateur. Narayana, Narayana. So, who do you think built these ships in the ancient period? Who would have built it? Who had the knowledge for it? Thank you for using the word, the Shudras. Surely Brahmins didn't build it. You had communities around these trades and these crafts. Could they have built ships without education? Without technical education? Is it possible? Can you be a sthapati from the Vishwakarma community who's sculpting the itihasas and the Puranas on the walls of the temple without understanding our itihasas and Puranas? Surely Vishwakarma community doesn't fall within V1 and V2, going by the current classification. So they had access to this. So what is it about Bharat's history and the nature of Hindu society that we are missing? What is it that we don't understand? I'm a mechanical engineer. Let me try and use a former mechanical engineer at that. 2006 was the last time I touched an engineering book. So let me try and use that fraternity as an example to try and see if I can draw some parallels with how the Hindu system is operated, and then explain and come back to the history of Bengal. I'll tie it all up. Just give me some time to, let's say, build some lead into this. One, mechanical engineers don't build things. We design. We don't put together formulae, we use. So there is someone even above us, and that has to be the Puritan, someone who is into basic research, fundamental research. That guy wouldn't know how to operate the lathe machine. Even engineers, most of us don't know. You might assume that if a vehicle were to break down on the highway, we would know how to operate or repair. Most of us don't. If you ask a mechanical engineer if he knows how to, let's say, build a mold in the foundry, which is what it's called, he learns it from a non-engineer. He doesn't learn it from an engineer. He learns it from a non-engineer. Because the person at the shop floor knows he does what he knows best. As a mechanical engineer, when you enter the core sector, which is the manufacturing sector, you are expected to go through the boot camp, which is to go to the shop floor, understand how machines actually run and work through people who are actually qualified through what we call the ITI programs. Not IITs, ITIs. And you're expected to engage with them, understand them, acclimatize in that environment, understand what they go through. If you don't earn their respect, you cannot hope to run a factory. If you don't earn the respect of the people at the shop floor, there is no way you can run a factory. My family has produced so many mechanical engineers that it was the default option, so literally it's a family of nuts and bolts. And so many of them have risen through the ranks, and they know what it means to earn the respect of people on the shop floor. You may have scintillating degrees to boot from the best of institutions, you may know how to put together an equation, you may talk about the science of it, but you don't know what to do when something breaks down at the shop floor. They know it better. So the Hindu structure, you have to see it as increasing degrees of abstraction. That does not make anyone at any rung or level inferior, because your abstraction is useless if you don't know or if you don't have someone who knows how to bring it to life. Just give someone a simple piece of metal and ask them, this is the shape that it is supposed to finally come out with. Here's the lathe machine. I'm giving you all the heads you need. I'm giving you all the drill bits you need. I'll give you all the tool bits you need. Let's see if you can do this on your own. The best of engineers will suck at it. They don't know what they're doing at all. Not just in this country, in most countries. Because our job is to design using equations that we have inherited from someone who has done basic research, and then it is farmed out to someone for implementation on the shop floor. Brahmins may have actually put together schools of mathematics, but its implementation on the ground for actual application was done by non-Brahmins. That's how this society has operated. It is a symbiotic structure where no one jati or varna can exist without the help or the support of the other. And the higher the levels of abstraction, both with respect to, let's say, secular knowledge and religious knowledge, the higher is the obligation on you to maintain purity of character and purity of ritual, both. Chitta Shuddhi along with Shuchi go hand in hand. That is the broad framework or the scheme of the metaphysics of the Sanatana society. If you don't understand this innate impulse which informs our societal structure and organization, it is very easy to play mischief by pitting one against the other. It's as good as pitting the head against the hand, as if the head can do without the hand, and the hand can guide itself without the head. This needs to be understood, because as I understand, the way winds are currently blowing in whichever quarter, This is going to be the subject of discussion with several forces within and without trying to poison this crucible and this cauldron. And this needs to go out in as many languages as possible, at every level as possible, so that we protect and preserve ourselves from implosion and explosion. Will come a change in wedding rituals and everything and all the sanskaras that you follow. So what does this tell you? After a point, that identity is a function of your domiciliary status. Wherever you stay for domiciliary status, wherever you stay for generations. Why do you have Guptos and all that? I just wanted to tell you that my family is the one that helped Shivaji Maharaj escape from Agra to the Sahyadris. And we were originally from Agra. We are otherwise people from the north. He realized that our entire family would be persecuted for enabling this escape. And therefore he said, you run away with us. And once we reached the Sahyadris, we were given two options. Here is this fort called Salher, here is the fort called Mulher. Choose one of these two. They chose Mulher, and their surnames have become Mulherkar. And what is the language that their extended family speaks? Marathi. 400 years ago or 300 years ago, they wouldn't have spoken Marathi. Take the example of Sri Krishna Deva Raya. Tamilians can celebrate him, Kannadigas can celebrate him, Telugus can celebrate him, and aficionados of Sanskrit can also celebrate him. From Amukta Malyada to every book that he has written, a lot of people actually claim for themselves that he is their icon. I suspect, and I'm sorry to say this, that this regional chauvinism is significantly a contribution of colonization, coupled with the enforcement of that colonial move through the state reorganization on a linguistic basis in 1956. If that had not happened, I don't know if we would be addressing Shivaji Maharaj's empire as a Marathi empire. We would have called it a Hindu empire. There is a decent chance that we wouldn't be fighting for icons and imputing regional labels to them, but for the colonial experience. Not but for the Islamic invasions, but for the colonial experience, which means prior to that and until that point, you hadn't lost your sense of who you were, and you had not decided to divide yourselves on linguistic lines or regional lines. Sri Tyagaraja comes from Tiruvayar in Tamil Nadu. All his songs are, at least most of them, his kritis are composed in Telugu. He comes from the Kaveri belt. He comes from what we call the Bhagavatar lineage. But today, Carnatic music is associated the most with which state? Where is the music festival every year during winter season? It's in Tamil Nadu. It's not in Karnataka. It's not in Andhra, or even divided Andhra Pradesh, which you know as Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. The world over, people come from all parts of the world only to attend to this music festival in Tamil Nadu, including contingents of Japanese. Some of the photographers who have actually come, I recently shared a video of a Japanese gentleman who knows the ragas by now, who speaks Tamil by now, whose only job during this festival is to come to Tamil Nadu to be a photographer for each of these kacheris or these concerts or performances. What I'm perhaps trying to tell you is, my message of decolonization has been misunderstood, distorted, sometimes either unintentionally or with motivation. But the point is not to push xenophobia, but the point is to unplug ourselves from the matrix that we have injected ourselves into. Once upon a time, out of sheer compulsion, and now out of choice. To try and say that I don't think there is something called as Bengali history. I'm sorry to say this. I think there is a history of Hindus in Bengal. That's how I see it. And I don't say this for brownie points before this audience. In the 400 and odd lectures that I've delivered since September 2016, which started at the Press Club of India, I don't think I've ever made a regional statement ever. And that is because I have lived across different parts of Bharat. You can do a fact check on this. You will not be able to prove me wrong on this. I rarely get my facts wrong. At the age of 16, I'm out of Hyderabad. Sorry, Urf, Bhagyanagar. The next 4 years are spent in the heartland of Dravidianism, Coimbatore, doing engineering from 2002 to 2006. 11th of July 2009, I set foot in Indraprastha. I have spent close to a decade there, 16, 17 years in Delhi, which I think is named after Maharaja Dilu. I am fairly comfortable with Hindustani, which is a Mishrit Bhasha. I'm fairly okay with Klisht Hindi. I understand a smattering of Malayalam. I can understand the swear words of your mother tongue. I understand the Telangana dialect of Telugu. I understand the Andhra dialect of Telugu. I can identify various dialects of Tamil. So for all practical purposes, I have no regional identity in my head. What others may impute is a different issue. I'm certainly proud of my roots and my origins. Don't get me wrong. क्योंकि जो अपने घर का नहीं हो सकता है, वो समाज का क्या होगा? So ये global citizen nonsense मुझे तो बख्श दो भाई, मुझसे वो होता नहीं है. I don't believe in that. वो बाद में होगा. तुम पहले यहाँ से शुरू करो. See, global citizen is the same as that fad which says, I am spiritual but not religious. दोनों एक ही लेवल के superficial nonsense है मेरे हिसाब से. Therefore, you should tolerate my Hindi as well. So the point I'm trying to make is, we have enough issues to deal with already. After millennia of struggle, going through rapacious genocides, where we have been pushed to the verge of extinction multiple times, we have come back. We finally have a demographic dividend with exposure to technology, alternate media which is capable of pushing our points of view, and I use them in plural with responsibility. This is not the time for the Hindu society to be bogged down by fratricide, because that would pave the way for genocide. One of the reasons that I started off by discussing the history of Hindutva in Bharat, in Bengal, in the 19th century, is not because something is approaching, because I'm unconcerned with it. Because I care only for Hindu survival. That is my bottom line at all points of time. I have no interest in overtly or subliminally dictating your electoral choices at the hustings. That is your prerogative, that's your constitutional right, and you don't need to disclose this to anybody else. The attempt here is to convey to the rest of the world, especially those who write off two categories of Hindus, Bengali Hindus and Kerala Hindus. Don't make that mistake. Please don't do that. That is wrong. Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, has still survived in Bengal because of its own native impulse to be Hindu, to remain Hindu, despite overwhelming odds. If anything, this society has managed to keep jati identity alive without letting jati dictate everything, to a significant extent. It's not as if you don't have the Roys and the Shingharoys and the Ghoshas and whatnot. You have everything under the sun. But it hasn't resulted in the kind of jativad that you see in other parts of Bharat. There may be certain reasons for it. Maybe someday I'll understand it better. I'm not going to hold forth as if I'm an expert on your internal history at this point. Sorry, your history at this point from a non-Bengali perspective. And the reason why I say that is, there is something that you've done. I don't wish to give communism the benefit for it. I don't think it is the product of communism. Nor do I think it is the product of certain social movements, starting with the Brahmo movement as well. I don't think that's the case. There is a decent chance that you represent the fundamental state of a Hindu society as it is meant to be understood if it were not to be influenced by the colonizer's influence. I think that is who you are. And perhaps that's who all of us have been, until we decided to bring in atrocity literature, which has no basis whatsoever, to paint 2,000 years of history, 5,000 years of history. Where is the basis? What is the evidence? Because the big picture that's emanating from that entire scene that meets the eye is that you have a bunch of super elites where the rich and the powerful congregate. They choose to deprive you of your fundamental cultural and religious moorings, make you dependent on them, which is corporations and politics. And this comes from a hardcore non-communist. I don't have a problem with wealth creation. Please don't get me wrong. And ultimately, that society where every individual has been atomized to the core is left with no survival mechanisms or devices to protect his mind space. And that mind space has become the battleground for all and sundry. From pharmaceutical corporations to social media organizations to politicians, to the extent you don't know what is fact and what is fiction anymore. And a society which has gained material prosperity is hurtling down the path of dystopia. Because artha, kama is done, but what is not there is dharma and moksha. Those guardrails are completely absent. So it's easy picking for anyone who knows how to control the minds. And that's what the Western society has become. As a Hindu, as a practicing Sanatani, I don't suffer even a scintilla of schadenfreude, which is I don't take vicarious pleasure in somebody else's suffering. I don't. Whoever it may be. I'm just saying that the trial and error process of the West is complete and you can see what the end result looks like while you are still growing. That picture is not unique to this side of the Atlantic. Europe is no better. I think in 21 or 22, in one of my conversations with this good friend, Arihant Pavaria, as part of his podcast, VAD, I specifically said that the one part of Europe which will be relatively untouched by this deluge of materialism would be the eastern part, would be the Polands of the world, the Russias of the world, basically because for good or bad, the Orthodox Church is still alive. And therefore, it sets a benchmark for human behavior and says, thus far and no further. Have some red lines, some bright lines that you will not cross, either in individual life or politics or social life. If there is no Lakshman Rekha whatsoever, then where does this go? It's a free-for-all, a laissez-faire approach to values, so to speak, and then this is the end goal. Everything goes is the name of progressivism. I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that nonsense because it basically operates without a sense of responsibility, with no conscience, and is certainly incompatible with Sanatana Dharma because we believe in karma. Every action has to have some consequence, good or bad. So, I am not here to tell you stop using technology. I've never made any of those Luddite suggestions ever. I'm only saying your interest in Bharat's culture should not be limited to its political history because the ripple effect is into society and then consciousness, metaphysics. A society which has been completely denuded of its faith in spirituality now is looking for someone to show up on the horizon, to show them the way. Every YouTube video of Trump in the comments is praising Putin. That tells you that notwithstanding the psyops that they may have resorted to, the propaganda that they may have resorted to, people are able to see through the BS and they realize, okay, there is something wrong with our society. There is something fundamentally wrong with us, and we have not been able to hit reset because all the tools and mechanisms which can hit reset have been taken over, or they've been completely denuded of any kind of social say. My look at Bharat's history or any part of it or any region or cross-section of it is not meant to be an archival study. I'm just saying, so recently I've been described as someone who's constantly going around with the hammer of decolonization looking for a nail, which is to say that you're only presenting the problem statement, but where is the solution? I'm saying some of the solutions which lie in the past are not palatable to you. And those solutions which you can even perhaps adapt, morph, apply to your current circumstances, there is a mental barrier in the audience. Therefore, I need to unplug the audience from the matrix that it has been pushed into before it can start seeing the value of those solutions. Decolonization is not an academic exercise whatsoever. If you hate that word, junk it, trash it, I don't care. But surely you must be in a position to acknowledge the impact of colonization in your lives. Whatever is it that you can do to remove its impact or its effect, the negative effects at the very least, feel free to call it whatever you wish to, but at least apply the substance even if you junk the word. I'll narrate a few instances from my own life, not because it is of any particular value, but how is it that I myself have been pushed deeper and deeper into this journey. There's a decent chance that I'm regurgitating a few things that I've said elsewhere, but the good part of being a lawyer is that I know how to present old wine in new bottle, so suffer it. So after the Sabarimala experience, I had a couple of people coming and telling me, sir, abhi you will be exposed to all sorts of energies because you have touched a particularly sensitive and serious subject. मुझे लगता है आपको साधना शुरू करनी चाहिए. I said, यार मेरे schedule में कैसे होगा? It's already a nishachar. It's the life of an asura brahmana. कहाँ से मैं करूँगा ये सब? And given my energy and aggression, मैं एक जगह पे बैठ नहीं सकता. ये साधना किस नाम की चीज़ है? ये कौन सी लड़की है? I don't know. So with time, I realized, and there was a phase, I think between 2018 and 2021-22, when I was pulled into these lecture circuits despite my practice commitments. And after a point, I unplugged out of it only to ask myself, what is this leading to? What is the impact? What is the actual value add to anyone? The good part is, I was able to share my own journey and my learnings with the people who bothered to listen. And in the process, I realized that topics which were hitherto untouchable, pun unintended, and issues which couldn't have been broached, I'm able to finally talk about it. Because the one word that has completely been pixelated out of social conversations and public conversations is consciousness. Because one of the things that we don't understand about secularism is that we always see it only from a political lens. Secularism means the state will maintain a distance from one particular religion, or it'll have a hands-off approach to certain religious institutions. But the one thing that it does is that any discussion about metaphysics in public discourse is to be treated as an ornamental discourse which is compartmentalized. It has no relationship with politics. It has no relationship with social discourse whatsoever. That is the impact of secularism. It tells you, sorry, spirituality is different and Rozmarra ki jo zindagi hai, wo alag hai. These two cannot collide. They don't need to collide. They exist in, let's say, watertight compartments, in silos and walled gardens. That's effectively what we've understood. My realization is, in my view, and I'm not putting forth a conspiracy theory, I think more and more the files are released, this much has become clear. It has been a conscious attempt to empty our heads of these important layers, these filters. It has been a designed approach, a targeted approach to remove those filters from our heads. And the mind is a vessel which can never remain empty. So it boils down to one simple question. Do you wish to fill it with gold, or do you want garbage to rush in? That's the only question that you have to ask. Now that gold has been emptied out from your head in the name of jati, manuvadi, brahmanvadi, this and that, it is now open to all sorts of, let's say, nefarious influences. Therefore, your state is an important example in that poor context. So allow me to say this with some degree of responsibility. The social movements and the religious movements, or the reform movements of the 19th century, had two impacts. First, it told you ritual was not necessary, plus it was bad, and ritual is equal to superstition. That was the first wave which changed Bengali Hindu consciousness. The second wave said, anyone who holds the power over ritual, or who teaches you ritual, is wielding a tool of social oppression and exploitation. Therefore, those who could actually give you some kind of guidance were removed from the equation altogether because they had been villainized, as opposed to being celebrated, valorized, encouraged, whichever way you see it. And I'm not referring to one particular varna or jati. I'm just talking of those people who were in a position to offer cultural, spiritual, and thought leadership to Hindus. Then the third wave said, we are in this daridra condition because of our polytheism and because of our diversity. Therefore, let us now prove the worth of the religion of our ancestors on the anvils of the colonizers' religion. Therefore, let us also show we are also no different from monotheistic faiths. And then started an attempt to recraft Sanatana Dharma on monotheistic lines. A polytheistic tradition is then force-fit into a monotheistic tradition without realizing we follow both monotheism in consciousness and polytheism in expression. That is what we do. Ultimately, it may be Brahman, and then you have Devatas. So that layer effectively decides that, you know what, how do I make materialism into Hindu thought? Wherein you're looking for villains in all priestly positions. I'm sure everybody suffers, and there is a reason for it. Because the more you read literature, you realize that the Church of Brahmo Samaj actively sent out missionaries across the country, including to the south. They went to Punjab, they went to Maharashtra, they went to Tamil Nadu, all parts of Bharat. At one point, this movement was leading the intellectual discourse not just in this part of Bharat, but the rest of Bharat. Fortunately, the leading lights of this movement realized that there are some serious issues with the foundational assumptions of Brahmoism. Taker in a good way, in my humble view, was Sri Rabindranath Tagore. And the conviction to take on the empire at its peak. And the conviction to take on the empire at its peak, intellectually and militarily. In my view, a Bose would not have been made possible without Sri Aurobindo. They may not be Samkaleen, they may have spoken, they may not have spoken, but the ambience and the atmospherics that was created or were created made it possible for someone else to take the torch from there on, take the baton from there on, and move forward. The more you read, you'll also realize that there is a serious umbilical cord that connects the Brahmo Samaj and the founder of Arya Samaj. They met, they were talking, and then you'll ask yourself, okay, is there a common pattern of thought that is going through this entire dhara across the country? Which is why I don't think we should read the history of Bengal in silos with a tunnel vision. They were interacting even in those days when there was no social media. They were actively talking to each other. They were cross-pollinating. All of this was happening. The one question, the most uncomfortable question that I wish to leave the audience with, and please do take it back, do your own research. You can junk and trash everything that I've said, but just take this as a homework question and find out the answer on your own, which is, did we have this kind of antagonistic jati consciousness prior to the colonizer setting foot here? That's the only question that I wish to ask. That's the one question that I think is important, because while there is a raging debate with respect to the outsider, there is also a raging internal debate. The question is, I'm so grateful, thank you, he has a pen and a paper. Before the colonizer put his roots in Bharat, that is post 1757, did we have jati wars where one jati hates the other, and did it apply the oppressor-oppressed framework prior to that? If anything, literature says that this entire framework was prepared in the laboratory of the 1970s, thanks to your own intellectuals. You have given the problem. I'm happy to submit that you have the antidote as well to that problem. There is a wonderful book written on the history of Brahmo Samaj by this gentleman called David Kopf, K-O-P-F. That book is a wonderful resource to understand the psychology and the backgrounds of the leaders of Brahmo Samaj. So, some of the leading works on the Brahmo Samaj, according to me, Sophia Dobson Collett, among the earliest biographers of Brahmo Samaj, who had seen Raja Ram Mohan Roy in action at a church, I think at a Unitarian church in England, as a young girl. Her work she hands over to Shivanath Shastri, who subsequently becomes one of the leaders of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, along with, I think, Devendranath Tagore, or maybe Keshav Chandra Sen, I don't know, one of these two. His work is the next book that you have to read. But all of them were writing as insiders to the movement, as people with a skin in the game, as stakeholders to the entire worldview. David Kopf writes this book in the 80s, 1980s. And he says, and the best part is he reads translations from Bengali libraries. He pulls out material that was not previously available. He pulls it all out and he says, my sense is this was a confused lot, which was suffering from, in his own words, a psychological problem of identity confusion, because they had one foot outside and one foot inside. So his entire question was, how do I make sense of these people who were coming from the Kulin Brahmin families, who were coming from hardcore Vaishnavite families, and how do I make sense of their love for Unitarian Christianity? What explains this? And why would they want to recraft and remold their own faith in the mold of the other, especially in the mold of the religion of the colonizer? Why would they do this? You can read the book, but in my view, the introduction of the preface to the book contains about 3 or 4 scintillating, incisive and educative paragraphs where he does a brilliant analysis of what he thought was driving them. Read that. Please do read that. And this book is commonly available on most pirated websites. So you should be able to read it. Comes from an IP lawyer, I understand, but whatever works. But please do read it. Now what is happening and why I think this audience has been made possible, apart from the brilliant efforts of stalwarts like Sri Swapandas Gupta, is that Kal Chakra phir se ghoom chuka hai. Bengal, as much as the rest of Bharat, is ready for ancient wisdom and its contemporary relevance. I am not someone who suffers from pre-industrial nostalgia. It's like, oh, good old days, let's go back to go charate hain, ye karte hain, wo karte hain. I myself, if I'm pushed to the wall, how much of the Nitya Karma responsibilities and obligations will I be able to discharge as prescribed by the Shastras? I don't know. But it's one thing to realize that I may be a personal failure in that regard, but another thing to realize the value of it. I am no exemplar of how that is to be led, but I would weep more over the loss of the mind that could think of the Shastra behind the consecration of the temple. Because that is knowledge. You can recreate a physical structure, but putting together and reconstructing that knowledge system is very, very difficult. How many shakhas of Vedas have been lost? We don't know. How many yajnas have been lost? We don't know. How many existing practitioners of Somayagam still exist? We don't know. Someday we'll realize that some German or some Russian is actually practicing this in some other part of the world. And not here. Because they have understood the value and they're taking it up. You can perhaps get sucked into the most, it's an adult audience, the most glamorous, sexy battle of all, which is politics. Or you can use it to a limited extent and pay attention to the dhara underneath and below. Politics is important. Of course it's important. Otherwise, the route from airport to Taj Bengal is full of blue and white. And it's not the missionaries of charity. So, it's unfortunate that some colors have become representative of certain minds. I can't help it. But I am trying to say that why is Rajadharma important? Why is the position of the Kshatriya so important, as Sri Aurobindo called it? He called the Kshatriyas to take their positions back, and he said, please step onto the stage. Because you have inherited generations of ruling and governance. And you're the only one who has the ability to wield the sword, which makes the practice of dharma possible. Because without the Kshatriya standing at the door with the sword unsheathed, it's not possible for you to follow your dharma. So Kshatra dharma is important, because without that umbrella, without that Kshatra chaya, you cannot survive. So I am not for a moment rubbishing the importance of Kshatra dharma or politics. But politics and Kshatra dharma is a means to an end. The end is practice of dharma. Never forget that. So politics for its own sake practiced by anyone is unacceptable, should be unacceptable regardless of who does it. And therefore, I am requesting the minds of Bengal to go back to your own, let's say, role models. I have to say this because otherwise I'm sure some YouTube snippet will cut something out and then all hell will break loose. Not that I care. In 2026, you have the benefit of hindsight of what happened from 1757 to 2026. उसका कुछ तो विश्लेषण होगा, कुछ तो analysis होगा. Some analysis of what happened, what are the lessons, why are we where we are, and what are the reasons for it. Somewhere we'll actually do the Mulyankan, right? So you may not want to pull people down or replace. But there is an alternate strategy that is typically applied in logic, reason, and philosophy, which is you create a priority or a hierarchy. Which is the ones who have batted for the civilization and its red lines will always occupy the highest possible position. This idea with me. There's a wonderful scholar. Please follow this person if you can on social media. Pranav Kumar Vasishtha, who's a wonderful student of Nyaya Shastra, who's done extensive analysis of Bharatiya jurisprudence, Hindu jurisprudence, why you just call it Bharatiya jurisprudence, and who's applied his mind to constitutional thought, made a suggestion to me. He said, sometimes when you speak, it gives the impression to people that you're trying to pull people down. Maybe you're trying to break certain icons. Why don't you try something else? I said, okay, tell me what is it that you think I should do? He said, why don't you create a hierarchy of icons? To say, इनके भी contribution को आप recognize कीजिए, लेकिन इनसे ऊपर भी कुछ लोग थे. That way you're not disrespecting someone, because after all that someone is responding to their circumstances at that point. But if you have people who were there Samkalin or who lived immediately thereafter, who despite those circumstances offered a better response to the defense of tradition, then respect that person even more. So I hope that someday we can actually have that so-called conversation. Coming back to Bengal, it is in your hands to decide whether you want this to become a Bangladesh or not. Already Dhakeshwari's land is being encroached for residential buildings. Chandranath Mandir sees regular encroachment. The surrounding green is engulfing some kind of green. I'll just leave it at that. At some stage, all this philosophical farrago has to have a practical consequence, and that is, in the interest of dharma, protect your turf, protect your territory. Shambho Shankara. So please consider this as a call to 3 different kinds of action. Since you take pride in being Bengalis who pursue the intellectual side, go back to reading your history better. All that history reading is useless if you do not practice dharma personally. Have some red lines in what you're capable of doing and you're not. 3, Naval, who is the current day philosopher, has said something which I've tried to say in cruder words. An individual can never win over a tribe. Tribalism succeeds at the end of the day. I am not asking for jati tribalism. I am beseeching you for Hindu tribalism. If we don't band together, we will be picked apart one by one. 3, as much as you may want to see yourself as a community of Bhudraloks or whatever that is, you have produced some of the finest Kshatriyas who have given the best of resistances known to world history. Don't forget that. Intellect and martial spirit are not necessarily mutually exclusive. They can go hand in hand, because at the end of the day, as Adi Shankara says, Shastra needs Shastra and Shastra needs Shastra to govern it. Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram, Jai Ma.